line on hey everyone on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you guys so much for joining this Wednesday Word. My name is Shaniqua. I'm gonna give a couple of moments, maybe like a minute or so before everyone joins. But yeah, this word today has been a word today. I'm looking forward to delivering the word today, but it's also a convicting word. And so, I feel some kind of way about that because it's, pointing some fingers right back at myself. But I think it's irony because I kept asking God when he gave it to me a couple of weeks ago, like, this what you want? This what you want me to do? And as I was preparing for it this week, I had searched in my notes because I'm an iPhone user. Don't hate Team Android, just don't hate. I'm an iPhone user, so it has our notes. And I actually had started this same message in 2014 because the notes, when you type in the same thing, if you're trying to search for something, or excuse me, I was trying to search for something and it'll bring it up when the last time you typed in it. And I literally the same like title. Well, I made a slight modification since then, but the same title and everything. I started this message in 2014. So the fact that God has brought it back around full circle for me to have today in 2023 means that I need to hear it. But it also means that other people need to hear it as well. The funny thing about this particular message is that, so the title of it is going to be is love thy enemy as your neighbor. I started out with love thy enemy. And for those who don't know me, yeah, so for those who don't know me, I really heavily identify with Peter. Peter spent all of that time with the Lord and then had the nerve in front of the Lord's presence to go cut some man's ear off. I identify with Peter. I also identify with Peter that even after that and after he denied Christ, he was so remorseful and it like cut him to his spirit, to his core. I identify with that part of Peter as well. But I identify with those parts of Peter's character, personalities, because it really is closely in alignment with mine, good or bad, at times as well. And so today's word, again, love thy enemy as your neighbor. Number one, I am not a person where I say that I even have any enemies right now. I'm pretty sure there are plenty of people who don't like me because I am very I speak with candor, I'm frank, I'm opinionated. I'm pretty sure people that don't like me, but as many people who don't like me, I have a whole lot of people who love me, more than like me, love me. But even with that, I really wouldn't say that I personally have any enemies that I'm aware of. There may be some out there, but none that I'm aware of. But there are definitely people that I have interactions with where conflict has arisen, where our personalities may have clashed, or the way I've done things has been different than the way that they've done things. And it just hasn't necessarily been the most fruitful exchange or communication. And then also there have been people who have hurt me in the past, but I've gotten to the point where I've been able to move on from that hurt and forgive those hurt, though that hurt. And so I can honestly say right now there is not anyone that I can bring to recollection that I will call an enemy or who has hurt me. I can bring to recollection right now those who I'm having some differences of opinions and approach and conflict in, but that's also something that's very human. And so when the spirit placed his message upon me, love thy enemy as their neighbor, I really was like, okay, God, what is it that you want me to say, with the full recognition that as I am preaching or teaching in this space, this is also the space that I find myself, that God is also still pushing me to be able to grow. Because as I tell people, as in this is an example of my personality, I perfectly understood when Botham John's a brother got on the stand and he forgave the woman who took his brother's life. But I also perfectly understand the slap that occurred a year ago when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. I tell people I understand both of those things. I literally understand both of them, and probably in those same situations would have probably acted similarly. Probably wouldn't have went and slapped anybody on the stage, but I probably would have said something off stage. But I give that as an example of my very human nature. And one of the things that I swore to God, and I think that the reason why He uses me even in this landscape and in this space is because I want to be very transparent as a minister, and I want to be able to be transparent as a Christian, because a lot of people struggle sometimes with their walk. They don't understand certain things, or they put those who are in ministerial positions on a pedestal. And don't get me wrong, there are things that we should be doing different than other people with this mantle, with this calling that we have on our life. But at the same time, I am human, they are human. And so I really believe that one of the reasons why God speaks to me a lot is in the manner that He called me specifically, is because I do try to show up as transparent as possible. So that gave you a lot of background for today's message, and I'm going to go through it really quickly. But today's message again is love thy enemy as your neighbor. And I'm going to be reading from two different scriptures. The first of which, and I'm looking at both computers again. I have one for Instagram, and then I have one for Facebook and YouTube and all of that. But so again, it doesn't matter where I'm looking. What matters is the word that I'm speaking. And if it touches you in any way, shape, form, or fashion, please share it. And so jumping right into the word, into today's message, it says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 44, it says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But here's what I tell you, love your enemies, pray for those who hurt you. And that was from our Savior, Jesus Christ. And then looking into Luke chapter 10, verses 27 through 37, I'm going to go ahead and read this. And Jesus was talking to someone, and he replied, you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and your neighbor as yourself. Yeshua said to him, Yeshua being Jesus Christ, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But wanting to vindicate himself, he said to Yeshua, this is the man speaking to Jesus, then who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a certain man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He was attacked by robbers who stripped him and beat him. Then they left him, abandoning him half dead. But by chance, a rabbi was going down that road. But when he saw that man, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite also when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. But a Samaritan who was traveling came upon him. And when he noticed the man, he felt compassion. He went up to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then setting him on his own animal, he brought him to a lodge for travelers and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever else you spend, upon my return, I will repay myself. Which of these 3 seems to you as a neighbor to the one attacked by the robbers? And he said, the gentleman replied to Christ, the one who showed mercy to him. Then Yeshua, which is Jesus, said to him, go and you do the same. I was reading from the TLV version, and so they was using Yeshua instead of Jesus. And so I wanted to just kind of break this down a little bit. So many of us have heard the story of the Good Samaritan. And what happened was that Samaria, for those who doesn't know, was a region, and it was an area where they were enemies of the Israelites. So they were enemies. They were looked at as being unclean. They were looked at as being someone to not be associated with. And so what happened was that there was this man who was attacked by robbers who beat him up and threw him on the side of a road into a ditch. From Jerusalem on the way to Jericho, and there was a man, a rabbi who was supposed to be the priestly rabbi, a man of faith, who came and saw the man beat to the side of the road. And did he offer help? He did not. He moved to the next side of the road and kept up on his journey. Then we see a Levite, which was supposed to be, again, a person of faith, a person who was strictly followed the law, a person who was supposed to do all that, was supposed to do all of that from a religious standpoint of the Jewish tradition. And he also acted as in the tradition, the family tradition, as a Levite, which is a priesthood as well. of the Jewish tradition. And so what did this Levite do? He saw the man, he did not offer help. Instead, he went to the other side of the road and kept going on. And then from there, we come across the Samaritan, who is this man that is supposed to be an enemy of the man that is in the middle of the road. And what the Samaritan did is that the Samaritan stopped. He took care of the man. He nourished the man. He gave him food. He tended to his wounds. He took him to an inn. He took care of him even there. And then he left money for his care to be taken care of, and then said that when I come back through, if there is more that needed to be done, more that needed to be paid for, I still will even pay more. And so Jesus poses the question to this person, which of these people is this man's neighbor? And the man said the one who showed mercy to him, and Jesus's instruction was go and do the same. But in the context of this, you have to look at, in the beginning, is that Jesus is speaking and he's teaching, and he is saying you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So today's message is love thy enemy as your neighbor. And so I want to really be able to talk about four quick points, as far as number one, how do we love our neighbors? And then number two, why should we love our neighbors? How do we love our enemies? And then why should we love our enemies? Because our enemies are our neighbors. And again, as I'm teaching this, as I'm preaching this, there are still fingers that are pointing back to me. Number one, Jesus told us that we should what? In the very beginning, I started off with Matthew chapter 5. Jesus told us that we should love our neighbors. And then he says, but you have heard it said that you should love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But here's what I tell you: love your enemies and pray for those who hurt you. So the first thing that you have to recognize, Jesus is instructing us to love. And for those who don't know, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4-8 tells us what it means, what is love. And so if we're to love our enemies, Jesus is telling us to be patient with our enemies. He's telling us to be kind with our enemies, that we should not envy or boast with our enemies. We should not be proud. We should not dishonor them. We should not be self-seeking with our enemies. We should not be easily angered. We should have no records of wrongdoing, that we should not delight in evil but rejoice in truth, that we should always protect, trust, always hope, always persevere, and that we should love and never fail. All of those words that I substituted for what we should do for our enemies is also the definition of what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor, so forth and so on. So Jesus has given us instruction that we should love our enemies. And so when we look at what love is, Jesus is telling us to do this. He's telling us to do this. And so sometimes we have these moments that we want to be like, really, Jesus, this is what you're telling me to do? You want me to be able to love the people who hurt me? And you want me to make sure that I'm loving them from an action standpoint, that I'm patient with them, that I am kind, that I'm not envious of them, that I am hopeful towards them, that I am trustful towards them. Trust within measure. We have to understand the concept of that. But all of those things, Jesus is telling us that we should be able to treat our enemies as such, that we should love. And then also Jesus has instructed us that we should pray for those who have hurt us. Pray for those who are enemies, because the prayers of the righteous availeth much. And not only does prayer changes things, it changes people and it changes hearts. It will not only change your heart and your viewpoint of the situation and the person, but it also has the power to be able to, if God so deems, change the heart of your enemy towards you and how they react and act towards you. And so Jesus has given us these commandments, that we are to love our enemies, that we are to pray for those who have hurt us and love us. And he also gave us the commandments that we should show mercy and give grace. And so what does that mean? Jesus, again, when it talks about the Good Samaritan, when he said, go and you do the same, and he said the great neighbor was the one who actually showed mercy to the man that was injured. And so what does that mean when we say show mercy? So the definition of mercy is compassionate or kindly forbearance towards an offender or an enemy or another person within one's power. And so it's actually where you're not to meter the action or the response that another person so rightly deserves. So by showing mercy means that I'm not about to do what you probably actually do deserve to be done for you. That's what it means to be able to show mercy to someone. The other side of that that is giving grace is that that's the manifestation of favor and power, especially by someone who's a superior. By giving grace to other people is that we go above and beyond to bless them, to give them even more so from what they don't deserve, because they haven't done anything to deserve those things. And so Jesus is telling us to treat our enemies as such, that we are to love our enemies, to pray for our enemies, to show mercy and give grace to our enemies. Jesus has given us that command. So if you're wondering, how do I love my enemies? Because Jesus has commanded for you to do so, this is how you do it. How do you love your enemies? This is how you do it. This is the blueprint for it. You love them, you pray for them, you show them mercy, and you give them grace. That is the blueprint. And it is hard to do that. I recognize it, but it's also beneficial. Why is it beneficial? Why must we love our enemies as we love our neighbors? Number one, because Jesus commanded it. Jesus commanded it. But number two, and this is even tied in my belief to Jesus' command of it, is that it frees us. When we are no longer bound by hatred, when you're no longer bound by resentment and bitterness of what someone has done to us, someone has hurt us, someone who is an enemy of us, someone who we have grown up. Because remember, there's this history between Israel and Samaria. There's been this history between them. And so they're automatically enemies even from birth. So this was something that they would conditioned into. And so when we recognize those things that are chain us, those things that we have been conditioned into, the bitterness, the hatred, all of those things, when we recognize that we can move outside of those things, that we can unchain ourselves, it then frees us. It frees us and it delivers us. You know, if someone has hurt you, if you're able to love them and pray for them and give them grace and show mercy, and I'm not saying necessarily they have to be directly in your life. You can do all of those things from a distance. But if you're able to get to that point, there is a level of freedom within yourself, that you recognize that you're no longer chained by how they treated you. You're no longer chained by what they think about you. You are no longer thinking about them. Your freedom within yourself is able to express because you are completely healed and at peace. And so why should we love our enemies in the manner that Jesus prescribed for us to do? Because he gave us a prescription. He literally gave us a plan of what loving our enemies will look like. And again, that plan is that we are to love them. And if you want to know what love is, go and look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4-8. We are to pray for our enemies because, again, prayer changes things. The prayers of the righteous availeth much. But not only would it change things, it would change hearts. It would change your heart, but it can also affect and change the heart of your enemy. That we are to show mercy and not meter out the action or the response that someone so rightly deserves. And then we are to give them grace even beyond what they do deserve, even beyond and on top of that, the manifestation of favor and all of those things that Jesus has given us as a prescription and as a plan of how we should love our enemies, because we are supposed to love them as our neighbors. And that then the reason why is not even necessarily just because Jesus commanded, which it should be. It should be just stopping right there. But the gravy on top of that is by doing these things, we ourselves are free. And so that is the message that I want you all to be able to understand today, was that if you're struggling with someone, if someone has hurt you in the past, if you actually do have someone that you would say, this is my enemy, or if you have conflicts with that arise out of communication with individuals, any of those things, Jesus has given you a prescription of how you're supposed to interact with those people. We are to love thy enemy as our neighbor. And we are to do that by his command that he has shown us in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43-44, and in Luke chapter 10, verses 27-37, when we're looking at the story of the Good Samaritan, that he went out of his way to help someone who, from a historical standpoint, was his enemy. That he helped them, he took care of them, he nourished them, he protected him, someone who historically was his enemy. And so Jesus used his parable to teach us that we are to do the same. That is the command that he has given us. He has also told us that we have heard that we are to love our neighbor and hate our enemy. But he said, oh no, I'm about to disrupt this. We are to tell that we are instead to love our enemies and pray for those who have hurt us. Jesus was a a disruptor, and he has commanded us as those who are his followers and those who are his disciples to continue disrupting as well. The state of our country, the state of our world, the state of our school systems, the state of everything that we have is so much that we oppose each other because we look at other people as our enemy, and that is not of Christ. That is not how he would desire for us to act. Instead, he has commissioned us to love them as our neighbor. That is the prescription for this world and for what so many things that we are dealing with right now. But if we don't take this medicine and if we don't understand this prescription, then we are lost. We are lost. And so that is today's message. Again, I asked God, why are you giving this to me? Apparently, I started this thing in 2014 and found it again in my notes this week when I went to complete it, or when I went to start it anew, not knowing that I did it literally in 2014. But this is a message not only for you, this is also a message for myself. And I started by saying I may not call anyone an enemy, but most definitely I do have individuals that I have conflict with, that I'm trying to work through things with because I see things different than them. I am not perfect. I identify with Peter. Peter spent all that time with Christ and then ran up on a man and cut his ear off. I identify with Peter. Know that about me. But I also identify with Peter that his heart was so rent, his heart was so broken when he denied Christ, and that he recognized that what he had done, and it set him on a new way. I identify with Peter. So when I give you this message, I'm giving it to myself as well. Love thy enemy as your neighbor. Thank you so much for joining me for this Wednesday word. I hope you all have a phenomenal rest of your week and weekend. For many of us, it is spring break. For many of us, the weather is also about to change back. So it looks like winter, maybe spring, who knows? For those of us that live in Texas, we're used to this. But regardless, I pray that you're well. Let me go ahead and close us out in a quick prayer, and then I'll be done and out your hair. Lord, thank you so much for this day that you've given us. Thank you for this message, Lord, that has been an on-time message, not only for me, but for those who have heard it, Lord. It is something that you began in 2014, Lord, unbeknownst to me until I looked at it. But apparently it waited till the appropriate time, because there is somebody who needed to hear this. There is someone who needs to act upon this. There is someone who needs to be able to move on from recognizing or seeing someone as their enemy and instead recognizing them as their neighbor. Lord, you have given us a prescription for how we are to act towards those, Lord, that who have hurt us, those who we consider our neighbor, those, Lord, who we have bias with, those, Lord, who we have feelings of even hatred and seeds within our heart. You have given us a prescription to move beyond those things, but also, Lord, you have given us the opportunity to walk free. And so, Lord, I just pray for anyone who has heard this message that they will receive everything that you have offered. It is in the matchless name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please feel free to share the message. I'll be back next Wednesday. I know the title for that one. I have it written down, but I can't think of it right now. I'm human. Anyway, be blessed. Oh, next Wednesday, I'll actually be at an event. So I don't know how I'm going to do that one. I probably won't be able to broadcast live on one of these, but I'm going to try. Have a good one. Okay, for real. Bye-bye.